my goal in this life is for Africans to become co-creators in prosperity and entrepreneurship. And, we need to have 2.5 billion Africans being prosperous by 2050.
Hello and welcome back to the Hannah Frankman podcast. On today's episode, I'm speaking with Magatte Wade. Magatte is an entrepreneur, she's an author, and during her childhood, she was raised in Senegal and in Germany. And in today's episode, I got to ask her lots of questions about what it was like to grow up in Senegal, what the schools in Senegal are like, what the education tradition is like, how the education approach changed during the colonial era in Senegal. And I got to talk to her about her experience building a school in Senegal, which is a project that she's currently working on, and also building a business in Senegal, and why entrepreneurship and teaching kids entrepreneurship is such a core part of her thesis around how to bring prosperity to Africa, which is central to all of the work that Magatte does. While you're listening to today's episode, if you would like to follow along and take a look at her school, it's called Tiossan Academy. You can find all of the information about it at TIOSSAN academy.org. Also, just as a heads up, we had some technical difficulties while recording this episode, but we didn't want to delay the conversation. So you'll hear a little bit of a decrease in audio quality from most episodes on the part of my microphone. But hopefully the quality of the conversation that we had makes up for any lacking in audio quality. I learned so much in this conversation, and I really hope that you enjoy listening. Magatte, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Hannah. Thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here.
I'm so excited to be doing this. I'm also very happy that we made this work after having a bunch of technical difficulties getting this set up. I'm very happy that we finally got everything working mostly as it's supposed to be, because I've been really, really looking forward to this conversation for multiple reasons. One, I've just always been such a fan of your work. I love everything that you do, and I'm excited to go down many rabbit holes with you today. But I'm particularly excited to have you here having this conversation, because so many of the conversations that I've had about education on the podcast so far have been very United States centric. We've been talking about the education system in America or in places very similar to America, like Canada or Western Europe. And there's so much more to the conversation than that. And there's so much more to be added beyond that, both in terms of context and perspective, but also in terms of learning from how people in other places do things and drawing from the knowledge on a planetary level about what we have learned across cultures and across time about raising kids. And so I'm so excited to talk to you about the work that you're doing in Africa with education specifically. I'm sure we'll get into all of it as we go, but especially with education and your own reflections growing up in Africa and what it was like to be educated there, and the work that you're doing now building a school. And I think that last part is probably the place that makes the most sense to start to paint context for the conversation that we're about to have. You're running a school in Senegal. Can you tell us a little bit about this?
Right. And thanks, Hannah. I think it's very important that as we think about this topic of education, to really try to also put it into the global context of things. So I'm glad you're giving us this opportunity. So basically, when I say we have a school in Africa, we are based in West Africa, in Senegal. That's my home country. And so Senegal is a Francophone African nation, as we have many of them. So most of Africa is divided along Francophone Africa and, Anglophone Africa. And then we have a couple Lusophone nations, which basically speak Portuguese, because they used to be, Portuguese colonies. So in any case, so us, obviously, we're part of West Africa. And I am an entrepreneur, so I'm building my third company, and we basically it's a skincare company we manufacture in Senegal. And one thing that was very important for me was to start an education program, because the reason why I even have a business in Senegal is my whole thing in life is about prosperity building. I want for Africans to become prosperous in our lifetime. My stated goal is 2.5 billion prosperous Africans by 2050, right? And for that to happen, it's we're going to have to rely on entrepreneurial value creation, aka this whole thing that others might call free market capitalism, or entrepreneurial capitalism. And if you say entrepreneurial or anything entrepreneurial, you have to be serious about really fostering people, little and big, so meaning kids and adults, but because adults were kids once upon a time, and the sooner you start this process, the better it will be. It's very important that everybody is monomaniacal on this concept of entrepreneurship, which means that it doesn't matter where you're operating from, whether you're operating from a standpoint of being part of a government or in the private sector or some type of nonprofits, education, you name it. I think it's very important to focus our efforts on fostering an entrepreneurial mindset. And I'm just not simply seeing it back home. I'm not, especially within that what I would call the classic education. So what you have to understand is, so Senegal being a colony of France, we used to be colonized by France. What we have inherited from that era is basically an education that's very much like the French education, very top down. But in our case, you also have an added extra flavor of colonialism. So all of our reference points are going to be reference points from France. Everything that we learn, we don't learn so much about our heroes, our own national heroes or continental heroes. It's mostly about heroes from another place. I mean, again, a hero is a hero. It's fine that we learn about other heroes, but it's also a good thing to learn about your own heroes as well. So what I mean by, as you probably would agree, top-down education, by now I would imagine that all of your audience understands why that's not a good idea. And if on top of that you have a colonial flavor on it, you can understand double why it's not a good idea. But that's what we have very much. And the worst thing is that even when you look at France right now, the education system in France is very much in need of a profound reform. Just like education almost all around the world as we know it is in need of profound reforms, because at some point, more or less around the world, we have adopted these very top-down type of educations. I think, and we can talk about it at some point, but I was raised also in Germany. So I went to school in Germany, which was a little bit different. And I have to tell you, I have a much better experience of having been in school in Germany than I have having been in school in France. But not to confuse people right now as to where we are. So in Senegal, this is what you have. So the French already are realizing that they have a really, really, their education system is in need of deep reform. They're struggling with it, but at least they're wrestling with it. Where we are really not questioning much, and when we do, we still kind of tend to copy what the French are doing. But bottom line is, what does it though mean for me? So right now in Senegal, what you have is an education system modeled after the French one, like I said, with a colonial flavor on top of it. But the problem you have in Senegal is you have a good 80% of the population lives in poverty, or, the middle class is super small. Then the bottom of a pyramid made of mostly, poor people is pretty much what you have. And then you have a tiny little elite at the top. So the school system as we know it, it seems to work best for the elite. Because why? Because when you get to school, the official language is French. In Senegal, the official language is French. But the problem is, for most people, they don't understand French. So you see, we're supposed to speak this French, but if you go right now to the village where we are, and by the way, we set ourselves up in a village because I really wanted to contribute to helping keep people in their communities. I am very much against people having to leave their homes, having to leave their communities, in order to go somewhere else in search for a job and for a better life. If people do that out of taste, because maybe there's something really better in the process, why not? But this exodus from the rural areas to the cities, and done by people who are doing it in very unprepared ways, is just a big no-no. So what's happening a lot is people are leaving the countryside, trying to go to the city, capital city of Senegal, which is Dakar, where a quarter of the population lives. So you can imagine how cramped the whole place is. So it means people leave their kids behind in the village. So in the village, you mostly have kids and older people left there. So in our case, well, I'm thinking the only way we can help people stay home and raise their children in the villages, stay where they are, is if you provide two things. Because for a community to build, it builds around two anchors: jobs and school. We are providing the jobs with our manufacturing facility producing skincare products sold here in the US. But then what you have is, I'm not going to sit here and say we don't have schools. I'm not going to say that. We do have schools, including in this village where we're operating. But truth be told, the quality of the public schools is terrible, really terrible. Because what you have, especially for these public schools in these poor areas, is that the kids who are going to these schools, they imagine, Hannah, you are now 5 or 6 years old. And in France, in France, because in France it's the same. In Senegal, that's when school becomes obligatory. It becomes mandatory for you to get to school, right? And you can't be homeschooled. Homeschool does not count. So that's the age at which, as a little girl, in your case, you would have to go to school. Now imagine your whole life. You're now 6 years old. You're going to have to go to school in September. But your whole life, you've spoken Wolof for the most part. Wolof is the main indigenous language of Senegal. We have many other languages, but that one is the most spoken among, it doesn't matter which ethnic background you are, usually you speak that language. So as a little girl, that's all you know. That's all you've heard. That's all you understand, because that's all your parents know and speak. Now, all of a sudden, from one day to another, you show up in this classroom where now everything will be taught to you. Now they speak to you in French. So you go from understanding, you know what it means when I say, in your case, it's almost like you only speak English. And all of a sudden you come to the school and they tell you official language is Wolof. So Hannah is 6 years old. She knows when I tell her, Anna, please bring me this glass of water, she knows what it means. And she'll go bring it to me. And I can then, go on to do her education with that language. But now Hannah comes, and instead of hearing, please bring me this glass of water, she's hearing, Indil mekas ndox. You're looking at me like, huh? But now you're going to have to learn that 2 + 2 = 4 in that language you don't understand. And it goes on for everything like that. So we're losing the kids left and right. Left and right. We'll never know what was in the minds of these kids simply because we had a language problem. And we've never really thought about fixing this problem, right? Of how are we now? I understand we can't just have all the education be done in the local language simply because that's what people understand. Because if that's all we do, at some point, the minute they go and have to talk to somebody who doesn't speak the language, it's game over. They can't function. And especially with languages that are spoken by only a few million people in the world, which is like Wolof, you're not going to go far with that. So at some point, we're going to have to use a language that the rest of the world can understand, whether it's French, Spanish, English, or whatever, or Mandarin, Chinese, Mandarin Cantonese, whatever it is. So in this case, that's what we have. You have these people who belong to the modest, social classes, who French for them, it's the official language, but they don't understand it. Their parents don't speak it. And all of a sudden, from one day to another, literally, they're thrown into a whole world where they're supposed to now come and become educated, yet they're being spoken in a language that they absolutely have no idea what it is. And year after year after year, they just lag and lag and lag and lag more and more. The gap just builds and builds and builds more. And eventually that's how at age 9, 10, kids drops out of school. And if they don't drop out of school by that time, they drop out of school by 12, 15. Very few make it to what we call the end of high school with a GED. And even those who make it, a lot of it is inflated, because now what you have is also with a demographic dividend, you have so many kids coming into the system The amount of kids being born is faster than the how much infrastructure can be built to welcome them all. And so what they're doing is they just keep on pushing all the kids through the system, whether or not they are at the level, and just keep pushing them, keep pushing them. Don't even say you're going to have to redo this class or whatever. Just keep going, keep going. So eventually at the end, you have all of these so-called diplomas that are very inflated and not worth much. This is how you have somebody who is at the university now, and when they speak in French, which is supposedly the language that they're supposed to use, they can't line up two proper sentences in French. So it's just this disaster we have. So in our case, but now if you have a child of somebody more from the elite, it's not too much of a problem for you, because chances are your parents they understand French as well. They speak also the local language and all of that. And of course, they can help you with both. And you probably have been speaking French at home as well. So you don't really have that issue. But the reality is that for most of the children, especially those of interest to me, because I'm all about allowing people, giving people this opportunity to climb the social ladder, right? That social ladder. And again, if we're going to get to 2.5 prosperous Africans by 2050, this has to be solved. And so this has been the dilemma we have been working on. That's why I needed to create a school to kind of, see if we can offer something better to these children. And I have to say, most private schools in Senegal cater mostly, obviously, maybe to the elites, and the ones that are catering also to the bottom of the pyramid, because we have some, it really is not going much. It's not doing much more either. I mean, kids are barely just being literate and fluent, having literal fluency, but really not much more. The bottom line is what we have right now going on is an entire it's been going on for a while, but basically now with the coming of more and more technology, AI being chief of them, and I'm not one of those AI doomers, for sure not. For me, I look at AI as something that's going to be really helpful to society. I don't have all the doom and gloom, but I know that it's very popular in Silicon Valley circles these days. But regardless, the point is, you do have an entire class of people who will never be able to integrate the 21st century if something does not change. So what we have set out to do is to create a school where we kind of work out the system that is going to be required in order to take children in this situation from where they are today to where they need to be, meaning people who can really face off the 21st century, creating lifelong learners despite all the challenges. And so the school was created for that. And right now we're at the point where we can scale it up because we think we have worked out the kinks. So what happened is we had to bring in the kids. And so at first I started with children who were 8, 9 years old, because I thought, silly me, that's why when you're trying to do something, it's always good to get into practice as quickly as possible, because there's always something that you're missing when you sit in the side of fury. So here I was thinking, okay, we're going to get them as young as we can so that we can still help them unlearn and relearn, but not so young that they haven't had their basics in French. So I really thought that 8, 9 years old would have basics in French, and then we could use that language as a bridge to do all the other things we need to do with them. Little did I know that 9, 10, they don't read. They don't know how to read. The French is really poor, almost no vocabulary, grammar, forget about it. So basically the French is non-existent. And all the skills that go with it, non-existent. And so we were just like, wait, what? So all of a sudden we found ourselves having to do with kids that are 8, 9, 10 years old. We had to almost bring them back to what they should have been doing when they were 3, 4, 5, 6 years old. You see how, and then all of a sudden I found myself just having to really go back with these kids, trying to take them back to where things should have began and keep going with them. But I have to say, those children have been troopers, and you see them just going fast, 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 and climbing back. And really, I mean, they're just so, they're just, I just have so much love and respect for them. It's not even a joke. So basically making up for years, of backlog, it's unbelievable. But at some point I told myself, I said, listen, Magatte, at the end of the day, time, resources, everything is limited. Can you continue doing this? Continue, although it's very needed. continue taking kids who are in the public system that's technically not going anywhere, and then bring them into this program, spend all of this energy and time to try to bring them up to speed. While you're doing that, you have the kids who are 3 years old getting started on the wrong foot. And then a few years from now, they're the ones you're going to have to go back and try to rescue. Can you keep doing that? So eventually we said, stop, stop. The older kids, because I call them the older kids, those 8, 9, 10 that we started with, we call them the older kids. So that cohort we had, we kept them because you become attached to kids and they become attached to you as well. And truly, they're doing well. And there is a future for them. So we kept them, they're our cohort, and we grandfathered them in. But then I said, from now on, though, all the effort's going to be spent on the little guys. So what we did is we went down to the little guys and basically building a program, which is the Children's House, Montessori style Children's House. So 3 to 7. And so really so we get the little guys, some of them are even 2.5, but very precocious for some of them, and then bring them into the program and just get started there. And then from there, you get it all right. What we're allowed to do at that point is also be able to even work on their nutrition. Because one of the things we have found, for example, is that a lot of these kids, due to poverty, they don't really get to eat the type of food that really would help with their, body, brain development, all of that stuff. It's not that people are stupid. You, Hannah, you see in the morning, if you don't eat, there is at some point where everything just shuts down. It's not because of the intrinsic quality of what's in your brain. It's like, everything needs to be fed, right? Everything needs to be fed and given energy and resources. So when kids don't have access, especially to protein, and we all know how important protein is to a brain, to brain function, it becomes a big problem. So even those things we had to kind of solve, and because protein is very expensive, everywhere protein is usually expensive, and so that's the first thing that gets sacrificed in their nutrition. And so even that we had to supplement. We basically were providing kids with eggs. We're adding stuff like carrots, like vegetables. Trying to come up with very nutritious meals and balanced meals so that their bodies and their minds are sustained the proper way, so that in return they can really focus on their work. So these are all the reasons why I did this, because I really wanted to give these children a chance for a true education, the one that I know will prepare them for the 21st century. I know you've had Michael Strong, full disclosure, my husband, on your show, and he's an amazing, I think for me, he's one of the best, educators out there, period. And he has this school called the Socratic Experience. And what they're doing is a lot of it is based on the Socratic method. He's got his own unique sauce, obviously. And so these children are also benefiting from some of those concepts from a very early age. So the goal here is to, again, build lifelong learners and really looking at the specific constraints that we have operating in a place like we are in a village with a lot of poor people, kids who don't even have this concept of having their own bed, right? For the most part, sometimes in some of these families, what the child is living in is, for some of the poorest, what happens is, when at home, it's not so much that they have a bed. So what happens at night when everybody goes to bed, then they bring in some little, mattresses, but it's not really a mattress. It's more like a thicker than, it's a thicker than normal, maybe, how do you call it? A carpet, and then put a piece of sheet on it. And then the kids, they line up, a few kids, and then they sleep. In the morning, get all of that off, it turns back into a living room. So you're dealing sometimes with kids who come from backgrounds like that. So you can imagine that, time for quiet, households where, because you have multiple people living in the same home, multi-generational, TV is blasting all the time. So you don't really have this chance for the kids to really be have a proper environment that allows them for thinking even straight. So the goal with the school is to keep them with us for as long as we can during the day. The next phase, especially as we scale, the next phase is going to be to keep them with us also during lunchtime, and even maybe provide them with a little snack before they go home in the evening. But the goal for me is for them to only spend sleeping hours at home, meaning like nighttime. And then as soon as they're awake, we bring them over. We have these whole routines of, brushing teeth, all of that. And a lot of things we have to provide for them because the families, not that they don't believe in it, oftentimes don't have a means. This whole thing started with the children of our workers. So the children of our workers usually are in better shape because their parents have a job. That's why, because they're working with us. But eventually we opened it up to more kids in the community that are not necessarily parents who work with us. So that's kind of what's going on. Maybe I'll pause there for a second because there are so many things I want to say, and I'm sure I have to say, but I don't want it to sound like a monologue. And also, I'm not sure some things make sense, don't make sense, or you have questions, because I realize I'm talking about very different backgrounds from maybe what most of your audience is used to.
Well, that's part of why I wanted to have this conversation, because I think that there are multiple sides of this that are really interesting and really important to talk about. And one is the differing starting points, the difference in backgrounds between children in different places, but also, as you start thinking through how to solve problems in different places and for children with different backgrounds, it shines a light on different aspects of childhood development and the learning process that you maybe never would have thought of if you're only looking at kids from one type of background where certain things are being taken care of. And so you just don't think of those as being developmentally necessary, or, they already have an aptitude to learn certain things because their environment is just making it feel not only like a necessity, but also very interesting. So you never have to consciously think about making sure that children are learning this. And so I think that's part of why these types of conversations are so important, is because it allows you to see a larger, like more of the colors on the spectrum of light that you maybe are seeing when you're just like looking through one prism at like one specific situation or one specific type of environment. And there are a couple of parallels that I want to draw between what you just said and some of the conversations that have already happened on the podcast. Because I think there's a couple of things here that are really interesting. And then I have more specific questions about how you're doing what you're doing. But when you're talking about this top-down structure, that there's almost like this two-tiered top-down structure, which is an extension of what many people who are frustrated with the education system in North America are very familiar with, but it's sort of a one-tiered top-down. Like we just have the one bureaucracy and it's telling everyone what to do, and it's not an efficient system, and that's very frustrating for many people. But you're talking about two layers of this, which just accentuate, you get like two different sets of breaking points for this top-down structure to not function properly or to like not interface correctly. Like it already doesn't fit on top of the culture to begin with. And then you have the second layer of, and the system is not serving the children. And what you're talking about with, kids being ushered through the system, even when they're not actually learning all of the things, is something that also happens in American schools, as I know you're very aware of. Kids, you get 70% on a test, and technically it's a passing grade, and you can get that all year and move on to the next thing, and you really only understood 70% of the material. And then next year you're going to understand even less because everything is iterative, so it's building on itself. So if you didn't learn everything that you needed to in fractions, you're going to have a really hard time in pre-algebra, but technically you passed and you completed the class. Mm-hmm. And so you have this incrementally building knowledge set that is just full of holes, and eventually it all collapses because a foundation full of holes, a porous foundation, cannot sustain the weight that is placed upon it. And so what is happening in Senegal that you're describing, it feels to me like it's an even deeper accentuation of something that is true in education as a whole, but because of the even more rickety scaffolding that it's all placed upon, these problems that are very universal become far more accentuated and far more problematic. And I don't want to oversimplify this, so correct me if you think that this is not a fair assessment. But as you're talking about this is all that's coming up for me, is like, wow, this is like the problems elsewhere, but it's even worse, and it's even more damaging for the potential that these children have. But I'm curious both. I'm actually really curious if this is something that you can speak to about maybe how you see the both not just the problems of the systems, but also the mechanics of it. Like, is the curriculum that kids are being put through, like, is it fairly similar to what people in America would be accustomed to? Like, if someone's listening to this and they're mostly familiar with just sort of like the academic progression that kids are put through in the States, like, is it a fairly similar progression that kids are supposed to go through? Or
Yeah.
are there fundamental differences? And then also in your school, are you like what does the curriculum look like? Like, how are you thinking about the foundations, not just the basic things of like making sure kids are able to establish a habit of brushing their teeth because they have access to toothbrushes in your school, but also as you're thinking about, you want to create a school where kids can graduate and become economic actors in an entrepreneurial sense, and they can take this world that they've been given, and instead of being shackled by the fact that they don't even have the skills to speak the language to navigate this, they can have the agency to say, I want to live this type of life, and I understand that I have the skills to go do that, which is the most noble goal one could possibly have. But I'm
Right.
very curious about like how you think philosophically about the education that you're stewarding your students through.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So basically, the students are the program in Senegal is more or less modeled after the program in France. Although, like I said, the French are doing reforms, and just actually 2 days ago, the Minister of Education in France basically was talking about some of the new changes we're going to have, especially when it comes to math and French. Allowing for different tiers, like within the same classroom, understanding that not all kids are at the same level. And they were going to have, like group 1, 2, and 3, unless I think it was 1, 2, 3, not ABC, but 1, 2, 3. But only in math and English. I'm sorry, math and French. They were going to do that because they're getting also that the kids are, but the levels are going way down, right? And so there, it's happening. We're not. None of this is happening yet. People are questioning the GED. Should we have it, not have it anymore? So they're rethinking all types of reforms. But us, we're stuck in what the old French system used to be, which, in general is more or less, close to what the American, curriculum is. Here and there, you're going to have maybe in math, you do fractions at this level, not at that level. So we might have some of those disparities, but in general, by the time they get to GED, they're pretty much all at the same level, whether you're talking about a kid in France or a kid in the US on the curriculum wise, right? Now, us, what are we actually doing to kind of address all of this? If you look at with the little kids, basically the children's house level, them we are working primarily. We basically designing a Montessori style model that's more or less unique to the Senegalese context in this case. Like all the material is kind of rethought to basically fit what the kids are used to, right? So some stuff is gonna work. Some of the typical Montessori material is going to work, like especially in math and such. But everywhere we have an opportunity to contextualize the material, we do it, right? So whether we're the spices, like right now, for example, there's a lot of work that went into even the breakfast, and how the breakfast would be prepared, what it would entail, and all that. So we'll always use things that are contextualized. When we're going to talk about music, when we're going to talk about songs, all of that stuff, we contextualize a lot. But beyond that, what we had to do in our situation was to really understand how do you go from the kids only understanding this Wolof language, yet that at some point they're going to have to move over to the French. And in my case, I want them as quickly as possible to also get to the English, because we all know if you want to belong to the global community, English is you have to have English. And we all know that kids also have an amazing ability to learn languages. Myself, I was trilingual at age 7, right? It's just for kids, it's super easy. So there is something there that's to be taken. So what we're doing is to try and work with those 3 languages, starting with the Wolof that they have. So at first, everything is taught in Wolof, so that the kids really get it. Like when they talk in Montessori about the concept of normalizing the classroom. So in order to get to that level, we primarily use French, Wolof first, and then eventually you get to the point where then they're almost like reading in Wolof, reading and writing in Wolof, while you only speak to them in French. So there is a way for us to graduate this way, and then you continue on with the English at a later time, a later age. So those are the things that we're doing. And then in our situation, we also like to add, the little Montessori. For those of them who are older enough, it's great to do what Michael has been doing with some of his younger students. I don't know if you've seen some of his, videos with people like Alana, or, when she was 4 years old, he started really having these conversations with her. And this, by the way, I want to go back to, because I was telling you that this education system as it is, it was never this way before. This is something that actually came with the white settlers. This is something that came. This is like a legacy left behind from the colonial era, right? And so when you look back at the time that always interests me when it comes to the story of Africa, because for so many people, myself included, for the longest time, the story of Africa and Black African people seems to start with slavery, then moves on to colonialism to present day. Where I'm like, wait a second, though, there were Africans on that continent before the white man ever set foot on the continent. Who were we? What were we doing? We had kids, we had, thriving economies. What were we doing? Even that's also the topic of the book. We were free marketeers, free enterprise people. This whole thing of Africans are socialists is complete bogus, misunderstood and conflated with this concept of Ubuntu. I am because we are. So anyway, when the education system is the same thing, it turns out that the traditional way of educating our kids before all the influences from the outside world were very much, the way we're very much along the philosophies of someone like Mary Montessori had obviously many years afterwards. So our people were practicing something very similar, minus the material, of course. But where the similarity was in very much the respect for the child, respect for the natural progress of a child, and also giving also respect to the human being that the child is. And so I prepared here a section here that I wanted to share with you. Showing that questions were asked gently and naturally without any effort. So this is from a book that I think people should really read. It's called Facing Mount Kenya, and it was written by Jomo Kenyatta, who was the first president of Free Kenya. So he was one of the African liberators. He fought for the liberation. And the good thing about him is he was an anthropologist. So Jomo Kenyatta, when he started writing about Africans, was actually one of the rare African anthropologists writing about Africa. Because even to this day, oftentimes anthropologists are not Africans who are writing about Africa. And there's a lot of things they don't get right because they only understand what they see. They don't necessarily understand what's underneath or even what's there. So anyway, so I will read you this section here that's on, if you get the PDF, it's around page 100 or 101, section on system of education. The mother notices that he, the child, does not like certain songs. She, the mother, at once introduces others with different phrases and melody embodying the same teaching. When the child is able to speak, he can answer many questions which are asked gently and naturally to test how much he has learned. Such questions as these might be asked: what is your name? Who is your father? What is his age group? What is the name of your grandfather? And your great-grandfather? What is the name of your grandmother? What are their age groups? Why were they given such and such names for the age groups? This type of questions goes back for several generations, and small children are able to answer freely without any effort or strain on their part. These questions are never asked seriously. They are always taken in the form of amusement or conversationally. In this way, the history and traditions of a child's family, maternal and paternal, become a stimulating influence in his life and form a fitting background to his environment. After passing the stage of infancy, the education of a child takes a different shape. The child is taught how to sit and walk properly to avoid having bow legs, for a straight figure is admired by, by Gikuyus. These are the Kenyan tribe he belongs to. Especially amongst the warriors, it is one of the qualities of handsomeness. And so they go on and so on and forth. But you see, this type of education has absolutely nothing to do with today. You compare it today to what is the education in Senegal, especially in these poor, situations, setups. It's like 3 4 kids lined up in a table this large and repeating mindlessly after a teacher who barely knows more than them, mindlessly the ABCs, history lessons laced with colonial flavor on top of that. That's what you have today. And that's very different from what I just described to you. But what I described to you was the traditional way in most traditional African societies of raising children. Even me, Senegal, you would have people like Cheikh Amadou Bamba, who is one of our spiritual leaders, and it was known that he would spend all of his time, like as an older man, because they sit under the tree. So it's not like they're behind closed doors doing bad things to kids, right? That's not what it is. It's like under the tree, having this conversation, and you see this older man having very serious conversation with a 7-year-old and talking about things that are very important, and in the conversation you see them they're talking to an equal, and this is something that it's widely now it's reported out there. The respect that we had for the child is supposed to address you, the adult, with respect, but you also owe that respect back addressing that child. So you can see now the discrepancy between that and what we have today. And just like with the capitalism, they claim that Africa is socialist. No, it's not. Socialism was brought by colonialism. The free markets it's part of my traditional heritage from before the white men ever came to the continent. And so even here, it was the same thing. It was the same thing. And I would like to argue even that, in my opinion, I think it was all quite deliberate, because on top of the top down, you also had the colonial, flavor of really top down. Because I think if you're going to have a colony, and you need to create people who are very obedient. And you cannot be raising every single child to become an obedient person. So what you do is you give that job to the parents, and the parents are non-suspecting. For them, on top of that, being a person with status in this situation is like somebody who has these degrees maybe. And what does it mean to be a good citizen? It means to be an obedient citizen. So you had all of these values that were instilled, that were turned into values by the colonizer, so that way it makes it easy for them to actually keep us under control. You, as a colonizer, you do not want people necessarily thinking for themselves. As a colonizer, you do not want people necessarily, being critical thinkers, and not people who have their own agency and can do their own thing. So what does it do today? And today you see it so clearly, Anna. So many folks in Senegal have not been able to go to school in the first place, or if they went, they stopped school very early. Because maybe you're a little girl and you have to be home helping the family. Maybe you're a boy, and at some point, maybe 12, 14, you clearly can tell that school is going to get you nowhere. You don't understand what's going on over there. It's better for you to get out and get an apprentice job somewhere. At least you make a little bit of money, and later, maybe you can become a carpenter or something like that, right? So, but very quickly, people get out of school, which means they have not been really tainted by this top-down way of doing things. And today it's funny because my employees, it's very funny. If I can tell you, if I'm going to hire somebody with degrees, I'm going to have all types of problems, from people who have no sense of initiative, no sense of doing more than what the contract says they should do. People who, for the most part, are very kind of entitled, like that little. So basically, on top of that, the Senegalese school trains most people who go through it to be French bureaucrats, literally French bureaucrats. And so you can imagine that you're not going to have entrepreneurship with French bureaucrats. French bureaucrats are simply not going to create businesses. I'm sorry, And even if you want to hire them in your business, you have to be very careful what positions you give them in. right? And you see it very clearly. My best employees, the ones who can really function with the company and have a flexibility to move with, the natural life of a company, especially when you're early stage, it's very much the ones who have not gone to school. So what we have today is my most interesting people are in a way those who did not go to school. While those who went to school and supposedly have the know-how to be accountants, to be this, to be that, the problem you have is very rigid mindsets. And it's not just because in this case maybe they're um, accountants, because you might tell me, well, accountants are like that everywhere around the world, Magatte. I know more or less, but not all of them. In any case, my point is, regardless of what it is, it seems like they came out of a mold. And in the worst possible situation, and I found myself today, most of the people I have did not go to school past age 15. But yet they are so roll up your sleeves and get it done. I had some of these women when they started working with me, they couldn't read their name and they couldn't count supposedly. But I tell you, they're never off one dime. Never. No, I don't know how they do this, but never off one dime. And of course, from there, we take them in. And by the time we're done, they know how to read, they know how to write, they totally can catch on all the skill sets that they need, but school supposedly should have provided them. So what I'm seeing here is the ones who went to school are trained to be French bureaucrats and not really worth. I mean, it's really hard for me to try and integrate them. And it's just not me. It's like the whole system is not designed for that. You know how the world works. But yet the ones who didn't go to school are most entrepreneurial people. And so we have this cross kind of, and we're trying to reconcile that. We're trying to see can we get both going, because it's totally possible, but only through the type of education that we're providing in our case, and that I know you've probably went through, whether it was through homeschooling or specific type of uh, schools that exist, follow the same philosophy, but pretty much that's what you have. And it's very interesting. It is very interesting to the point that now I almost don't want to hire anybody who has even made it to high school, because the longer they stayed in the system and the more the programming has happened in their brains, and they just can't let it go. They just can't. It's just like it's like very much people are formatted to do exactly what you tell them to do. And another thing that I do also, this is more like education that I continue within the company, is every time I explain, we ask something of our colleagues. That's how I call our workers. Every time we ask something to our colleagues or our team members, it's very important for me to explain to them the why and the principles behind why we have to do this. Why do we have to have batch codes? Why do we have to have even insurance? Why do they have to, when they first come, change their clothes, change, like sanitize hands, everything, their area, you explain everything. And then what you find is once they understand what's going on, they actually come up with better ways to get it done than what sometimes, the experts who trained us have come up with. It's very interesting.
Today's episode is brought to you by the original sponsor of the Hannah Frankman podcast, the John Galt Mortgage Company. My friends Mitch and Tim launched the John Galt Mortgage Company earlier this year, and I knew immediately that I wanted them to be the very first sponsor of the show because I'm such a fan of what they're doing. Mitch and Tim have been working in the real estate world for years, and they realized that mortgages are way more expensive than they need to be. Most people don't realize how much extra profit is baked into the cost of a mortgage. Most real estate agents don't even know. So Mitch and Tim decided to build a new kind of mortgage company, one where they voluntarily cap their profit on every transaction. And by lowering their own commission, they pass on the savings to you in the form of a lower interest rate than what everyone else is charging. For compliance reasons, I can't share specific dollar amounts here, but I've seen some pricing examples, and the monthly payment can be a lot lower than with a traditional lender. And I mean a lot lower. Mitch and Tim are also personal friends of mine, and they named their company the John Galt Mortgage Company, which tells you everything you need to know about them. I am not currently in the market for a house, but when I am, I will absolutely be working with them as my mortgage broker. You can find more about them at www.johngaltmortgage.com, or you can find a link to their website down in the show notes. And if you're curious about the name and you don't get the reference, Google who is John Galt. Okay, back to the show. I've heard you speak some about your own childhood in Senegal and about how the differences in how you were raised versus how children in America are raised.
Yeah.
And I've heard you talk about the responsibility that you had as a child. And correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds to me like there's sort of this parallel, almost like these tensile poles tugging against each other, where there's this very top-down system, and it sounds like there's this very heavy emphasis on credentialism too, the way that I've heard you describe it here, and when we've spoken about this before, it sounds like there's this, very bureaucratic system that's very entrenched in its own, in itself, and its own ways of being. And there's this heavy emphasis on, well, like, did you go through the system, get the credential? Now you're like qualified to do the thing because you have the piece of paper, not because you have any experience doing it. And there's this very, honestly, it sounds like an incredibly disembodying education experience where it's pulling you completely out of place. There's no connection to where you are living and where you are from and the culture that you're in, but also even the environment. Like there's no, you're not learning these connections to who are your ancestors, who are the heroes of your ancestors, what is the story of your place. It's very heady and removed, which is very disorienting for a human at any stage of life, but especially as a child, to have a very disembodied, dislocated paradigm that you're existing in this like weird sort of disconnected environment that like doesn't quite exist in physical reality, and yet you're expected somehow to like live and grow within it. But at the same time, it sounds like there's also this tradition of a very embodied, a very grounded, anchored way of educating your children. You like the passage that you read to us earlier about how learning how to talk about your ancestors and your lineage, because that's what anchors you in time and in place and in community and in family, and all of those things are very important as you're operating understanding of where you are in the world. But when you're learning about posture, it's because there's this very clear through line to how you're going to live in your community and what's going to be beneficial to you. And so there's this tradition of very embodied, very connected education. And so there's these two things that there's sort of this like parasitic, almost external system that's sort of pulling away from this cultural tradition. And yet it sounds like the tradition also still exists. So when I've heard you talk about, like, please correct the lines that I'm drawing here, because I don't, this is a murky picture that I'm highlighting the things that are standing out to me, but I want to hear you correct, you make the painting, you take the painting, then you show us an actual picture. But there's, it feels like there's, when I've heard you speak about your upbringing and the fact that you had a lot of responsibility, like I've heard you tell stories about like you had to go to market and barter for things, and the bartering was actually very important because you only had so many resources. So if you were bartering prices, that actually made a meaningful difference in what your family was eating that week. And that was as a very small child, you're getting this responsibility. And some of that, I'm wondering if, some of that is circumstantial, where you're just living in a world where that's necessary based on circumstances. You have to be useful and take responsibility quickly, versus how much of this is sort of part of the cultural tradition that maybe is, it's that way for a reason, much more intentionally than just somebody has to go to market and I can't, so I'm going to send my daughter. And, maybe some of the benefits that you feel from having grown up in that type of environment too, where you had more responsibility. I'm really curious both to hear you correct everything that I just said, but also to hear you expand on this. So I find this really interesting.
No, I think you depicted it right. So I have nothing to correct there. Maybe what I can do is maybe share with people a little bit more so we understand, because even after I moved to France, to Germany and then to France, it just...
How old were you?
7.
Okay.
But anyway, I remember very much, at home, So basically, my parents at right around age 2, they migrated to Europe, leaving me behind with my grandma. They did what so many parents do from Africa. They left me behind in search of a better life for me. And so in this case, they didn't take me with them because they didn't know if the journey was going to work, was going to be successful or not. And so not to disrupt me, they said, okay, you stay there until we know we made it for sure, and then you can come over. And of course, a few years later, they called for me to come because things worked and things were stable. So it would be good for me to go. And yeah, they were taking me from one stable situation to another situation that would hopefully be stable as well. But even then, when I was back home, I remember very well. The thing is, I benefited from growing up as what I call a free range kid. Literally, I was a free range kid. I did not want to go to school. Grandma said, "Leave her alone. She's not going to school," because she was very confident in the fact that for her, what is school anyway? What is school anyway? Little human beings. When you're a little human being, the job at work is to basically take you from this rough personality that you are to ideally have a well-rounded person whom we're going to discover your character. We're going to discover your passions. We're going to discover who you are. What I mean by character is more about we're going to discover who you are. Who are you? And so that's really what the job is. From when a child is born to for the adult is very much to help accompany you through the different phases of the journey. It's really very much being a guide, right? So then again, going back to Montessori, the way we looked at child rearing very much for the longest time was very much about being a guide. This idea of doing everything for you, not only in our societies, it doesn't work because we believed again in not really doing things for you. You have to really do it in order to be able to learn it. But it also helps that if you're living under circumstances where you don't have much, but it's great that all hands are helping. So in our case, it was not just utilitarian; it was also philosophical. I would argue, and the reason why I say that is because even after I moved, to Europe, and later when we're in France, by all means, you can say we didn't need any of that stuff anymore. But my parents were very clear about no, you don't waste just because you can waste. You always have to try and be as responsible as possible. So that's how I know it's also a philosophy. So when the philosophy also is support is also utilitarian, why not? It's a double whammy, right? You win on both sides. But so anyway, so my grandma I was very much a free range kid, didn't go to school, but because for her, school is not, you don't have to go to school to learn, to still learn, right? What matters is to learn. What matters is development. But in her mind, school is not, it's not, you don't have to be in this box called school in order for that to happen. And so she was very confident about that. And because that's pretty much the way she was raised herself. And so you see, some families very much keep that going. But some other families, especially the ones who want to call themselves elite, they buy into the status thing to do. That's why we call them so. The status thing to do is to send, your kids to these schools and to become this way and maybe a degree and speak French. And you have some families where they don't even want their kids to speak Wolof in the household because that's how down you look on your indigenous background. And it's funny because I talked at some point to some of my Indian friends. I talked to some of my Chinese friends. And it seems like, and of course, many other African nations' friends, and it seems like this phenomenon is not just with Senegal. I've seen friends from different parts of the world that are not from the dominant cultures say the same thing, that some of them would be actually hit if they spoke their indigenous language. Because the game is we got to be good at this other language, that because if you don't have it, you're not going to be able to participate. I could see why parents would do that, minus the beating, of course. That's another problem. There's beating, a lot of beating going on. But in any case, I go back. My grandma was very confident in the fact that development and learning, yes, is the goal, but it doesn't have to happen. It doesn't happen in that square thing called school. And so she was just like, leave her alone. And indeed, I learned a lot of things. Like very much her style was to let me learn through my experiences, literally. Like every morning, I had a little pack of boys, I was the little chief and I was the chief of clan. And they would show up And the game was, hey, what do you guys all want to do? And of course, somebody's going to want to go to the beach and fish. What we call fishing really was taking our little buckets and going to the shores. And when the fishermen come back, basically us begging them for their ugly fish that they can't sell. That's pretty much what we call fishing, but whatever. So we would go with it. So that's what I wanted to go do. So we would go there, and then, somebody wanted to go soccer playing across the field from my grandma's house, and somebody else just wants to go and hang out at the market, whatever. And then, and nobody wants to do the same thing as the other person, of course not. And so my job was to try eventually to get them all to agree on something, right? And usually most of the time we were also doing what I wanted to do, but I couldn't tell them, we're going to do what I want to do. I cannot boss them around because otherwise you're going to lose them. Because you know how it is. You try to boss people around and then when you lose them, right? Sometimes it doesn't work out so well. So what was happening during those times? I was learning to manage a little team. I was learning to also solve, arguments. We were arguing all the time, but most of the time we had to solve it among ourselves. And when things were really crazy and dire, then we might get my grandma involved or some of our adults involved. And even then, oftentimes we get sent back to our own selves to figure it out, And I remember later on, even with my own parents, if we're 4 kids, if we were I'm the oldest, if we would argue about something, then the rule was if my sister tries to go to my mom and tells on me, basically all of us are punished, including her, even though she's been done wrong. It doesn't matter. The thing is, you figure it out yourself. I don't want to hear it, right? Now, of course, if we're about to stab each other, then they get involved, right? But other than
Right.
that, no, I'm not getting involved in this. So we kind of very much grew up like that. I grew up like that. And my grandma also, sometimes I would come back because, of course, I was such a crazy kid, causing, chaos everywhere I go, having arguments. And sometimes, of course, I get punched here, punched there. And when that was the case, the issue would get or I punched somebody, the issue would get to my grandma, all the way to my grandma. She would try to find what happened. And that was the other thing. You see, she never gets on my case like for the sake of just because supposedly something wrong happened. She will always try to find out what happened. So she will always ask me my version of things, which means she knew that I would not lie to her because there's no, like whether so I would talk with no fears because even the way she would ask the questions, she wouldn't even come with a sense of disappointment or what did you do? Like, how I see so many parents do. It was just like, okay, like she would calm the situation down and then her and I, we go in a private area and there we sit down, she sits in front of me, right? Not like on the side, not this, not behind me, in front of me. She always lowers herself to my level so she can see me in the eyes. I'll never forget that. And then she talks to me. Then it's like, what happened? But the what happened is very open. She's not judging me. She's not accusing me, regardless of what she might have heard or she might have been told. And then I get to tell my side of the story. And of course she can tell it's true because I had no reason to lie because she's not going to hit me. She's not, I just know my grandma is on my camp all the time, even if I'm wrong, because she'll tell me you're wrong and then we'll talk. And so sometimes she would be like, you know what, actually, I'm so glad you did that or whatever. Or sometimes she's like, and then I would be like, yeah, grandma, yeah. And I would get sometimes to what I did wrong on my own. I would be like, as I talk about it, then I'm realizing that maybe, I should not have done that. Maybe I didn't have any business going and trying to play with the bigger kids. And when they didn't want to play with me, or when they didn't want to hang out with me, for me to grab like a handful of sand and just throw it at his face, because I do stuff like that. Things like, things like that. She would be like, yeah, I guess you're right. And sometimes, we just agree that, I'm not buying what I might still do this next time. No, literally, I remember sometimes and then she would be just like, okay, fine, but I guess you're going to have problems again. And I'm like, fine. So anyway, until, one day things really go bad. And then of course I stop on my own. But anyway, what I'm trying to say with this is, it was very much learn as you go. I have a big burn on my thigh because why? Because when we go beg for the fish, we then go and scale off the fish, ourselves. and then we organize a little fire. So I would go to some of the people who were making tea by the, like some of the guys who were making tea on the little, like a coal stove, whatever. So we go there and we ask the people, "Are you done with your tea thing?" Yeah, they were done with it, but the coals are still strong and going. So we put a little, we put our fish on there and start to roll it around and all of that stuff. For the most part, we were fine. But here we are. I mean, it's literally 6, 7, playing with hot coals, basically barbecuing a piece of fish, literally. And then when it would be cooked, take it over to my grandma. She would give us some of her onion sauce, and right there we're having a snack. There you go. But one day, it didn't go so well for me because there's a piece of paper that flew, caught on fire, continued flying, got me to the thigh, and eventually I had a burn. Okay, yeah, it's true. It was not good, but whatever. They say what doesn't kill you doesn't makes you stronger. And I had a lot of these things. I have like scraps everywhere, like everywhere. You would think people were beating me up, but that's how I kind of grew up. And I had really, really good fond memories of that time of my life. I learned to stop hitting birds, not because somebody told me it was the wrong thing to do, but eventually I had to learn the hard way that you read in the book what happened to me one day trying to hit birds with my slingshot, all of that stuff. So anyway, so when I went to France, and I would be sent. So I would help my grandma with her vegetable garden because her vegetable garden is what she would actually make money from. So she would, I would help her with it. Go get fetch the water, bring the water, and water what I could. I would weed things out, and then I would also collect, the vegetables with her. I remember being stung so many times by the okra. We had a lot of okra in our diet. We have a lot of okra, and you know how okra is. It has this little, I don't know how you call it, spikes or whatever it is. Those things that sting you a little bit.
Mhm.
So okra, we had all of those things, and then put it in the basket, help her. Then we go to the market together, and selling this stuff. And for me it was very real because I could see the linkage between her selling this, the money she's getting from it, and then how then when she's done getting that money herself, then we would go through the market and she would use that money to buy fish, to buy, then we get some bread, all of that stuff. I could see literally the relationship between growing the vegetable all the way to having food back on our table, literally, or her buying me clothes, all of that stuff. I could see the money going into her hand and then coming out of her hands when we go to the tailor for her to pay the tailor to make my clothes or for her to buy the fabric. So you see, when you live something like that, everything becomes very real for you. You get the relationship between the work you produced and what it did for you, and also probably the way it makes you feel. And later when I went back, and so that's why when my grandma would send me, sometimes I would be the one going to maybe buy the bread or whatever, because it's very easy to run a corner. Somebody has a little bread concession. You go there. It's very real for me, and I go there and I know that you barter a little bit because then you get to bring more money, more bread back home, all of that stuff. And then when I moved to Germany and then to France, my parents still kept sending me to the bakery or to literally doing some little groceries, light groceries, all of that. And it was very important for me to even like when I would go and buy groceries or fruits or vegetables, I was very good at even picking the fruits myself, like picking the fruits, knowing the guy because he's like, oh, she's a younger kid who comes to buy this thing. She probably knows nothing. I'm like, I don't want those apples. I don't want those mangoes are rotten. Because, I was just, because that's pretty much what you would do at school. And I grew up with this sense of value. And value is not necessarily what is the cheapest, but it's understanding quality versus price and making sure it matches. So I was always like that. And you see, you could say that at some point when we were in France, it was not about, being poor or anything because we were no longer that. But still, I kept that mentality. And I think that's what we have kind of lost in the West. I mean, a lot of people, it's not only kids, a lot of people are disconnected. They're disconnected from the means of production and what the means of production mean towards, in terms of earning an income and what that income goes then to do. It's the whole thing is very disconnected. But for me, it was very real from a very early age. From a very early age, I had a very clear, almost visceral, because I could see it, understanding of between work, making money, and using it to provide for yourself. And I think that's lost, honestly, to be honest.
It's absolutely lost. It's lost everywhere. It's something that's, I think most kids don't understand the direct relationship between those two things.
Mhm.
But you also, I think they also don't understand how directly their own inputs can become outputs and vice versa. So I think it's really interesting to watch a child discover how to think entrepreneurially,
Mhm.
because often I think it happens in the form of play or it happens
Yeah,
in the form of problem solving. So for me, my
yeah,
first experience as an entrepreneur, I was there were a few moments where like I'd do something and I'd get a little bit of money for it. I was like, whoa, that's cool. But the real moment, I was 12 when I started my first real business. And it was very much, I was just playing, I was just doing things. And then I discovered that people were appreciating what I was doing and they were interested in buying what I was making. So I was making hand knitted dolls for my sister, and the other moms in my homeschool co-op really loved them and wanted to know if they could buy them too. And I was like, well, I was just playing. Like I just wondered if I could make this thing. And I thought I'd give it to my sister because I, thought she'd like it. It didn't
that's right.
occur to me that this could become a business. And so
That's right.
I think it's common for kids to sort of accidentally discover this, or it's problem solving where they want money for something. It's like mom's like, well, you can get a dog if you can like pay for it. And the kid's like, okay, how do I make money so that I can have a puppy like I've always wanted? And
That's
then
right.
they go to problem solving. Like, what are all the things that people might pay me to do? Like mow the lawn, shovel snow, sell lemonade, whatever.
That's right.
But it's this really interesting set of thought processes to watch a child move through where they realize that they can do something in the world and they can convert their effort into either currency or something else that someone finds valuable that they can then continue to exchange or
Yeah,
exchange with.
yeah,
And it's interesting to watch that happen because it's not necessarily commonplace. Like it's fascinating because so many kids never have that moment. And there
yeah,
is, there's lots of layers to this. Of, some people are more predisposed to be entrepreneurs. Some people don't have as much of the temperament or the tolerance for it. But that doesn't mean that that understanding of how the world works can't be there.
yeah.
Like even if you don't want to start businesses, that doesn't mean that it has to be counterintuitive that you could, or that you might want some extra money and so you're gonna run a bake sale or something. Like the input output into the world relationship is happening all around us, and so it should be somewhat intuitive. And I think we've gone through points in history and different cultures in different parts of the world at different points in time where it has been more intuitive that if you want to make a little extra money to support yourself, you just do this extra thing and then you exchange it for money. But so much of the very institutionalized system that we live in and on national and continental levels are they're not designed to teach that, because that is not a valuable input into the system at large. Like you making cookies and selling them to everybody in your neighborhood to fund your kids soccer trip or whatever, like that's not helpful to the broader infrastructure. It's too small of an input. And so it's not a thing that ever gets focused on. But these moments where kids realize it are so pivotal to their development as humans, but also in their own both self-efficacy, but also their competence in navigating the world and being able to create the outputs that they want. And
Yeah.
I know we don't have a ton of time, and I'm going to ask you a very big question,
No,
and we'll probably need to keep this somewhat succinct,
yeah.
but
But there's one thing more I wanted to say, Hannah, when you were talking
yeah.
about that. Because for me, it's not just about when the value is about money. For me, it's really like value with a big V, right? With value
Mm,
with a V. And one more thing that I would say is I am personally, I'm one of those people who the more toys I see created and exist, and the more worried I am. No, seriously, because I'm one of those people who It's funny because one of the first gifts that my father gave me when I was still in Senegal and waiting to be and not being reunited with them yet was a big sized doll, like a real size doll. But for me, the doll, I never touched the doll; it was just over there. But where I'm going with this is the thing is the reason why I really had very few toys in my life, even when we were in Europe and we could have afforded toys, is because I never felt the need for toys. Because what were the toys most of the part? I see all of these kids, they like to have a little baby, to take care of and kind of change the diapers on. I'm like, that's not, are you kidding me? I was changing my brother's diapers. You know what I mean? And I was helping because my brother came later. By the time I come to Germany, my sisters were there already. But a lot of these things I was already doing. When people are getting like little things to wash clothes and it's a little toy thing. No, I literally had to wash clothes, even when we were in Europe. And I think for this is something also where I would like to really call out parents on this. I think prosperity, I want to get to 2.5 billion prosperous Africans by 2050. But prosperity should not have to entail robbing our kids from, I very much believe, like very important tasks that they can do. Like, you would be surprised if I told you that it never occurred to me if my parents had money or not, until I was maybe 17. It was never even a question for me. Are we poor? Are we rich? Never crossed my mind. It's very funny, very interesting. And it never crossed my mind. And, but we were doing all types of things, right? Like I said, I was always very frugal, value for value. I was helping with, raising my brother and my sisters. I would be the babysitter, and at no time my parents would have to pay me to watch my own, brothers and sisters. I, we had to share bedrooms, and by now I know that it didn't have to be that way. But I think my parents just made sure that we definitely did not have our responsibilities taken away from us. And see, this, I think many parents, I see them making this. I won't call it a mistake, but I think it's breeding, it's being counterproductive. I understand the need you might have for your kids to be comfortable, have tons of things you didn't have, but I really think that this is something that I would like for traditional societies to not give up on. Me, as I'm going to help my nation and my continent build their way to prosperity, there are some things that I'm very clear about. And I think the responsibilities of a child should not be looked as chores, but it's a whole opportunity for education. Of course, I'm not talking about 5-year-olds, doing hardcore work or anything like that, but each age with what it can do, right? So that's just something that I have observed, that I really, because you see it with children of immigrants in this country, what the children are able to do and what they have no problem doing, and it's not even like they have to be paid for it by their own families, because they realize you're contributing. When you have a child of an immigrant who after work, I see it after school, my hairdresser, when I go to my hairdresser, Senegalese, right, working mom, doing hair all day long, and she has a little salon. Well, when the kid is done from school, instead of going and fooling around in the neighborhood and turning into who knows what, it's like as soon as you're done with school, the bus is dropping you off here, or the dad is going to go pick him up, go back to drop him off at mom's place of work, and go back to work himself if it's still not the time. And that kid right there is sitting in one of his chairs, with like the chair where you go when you have that big thing to cover you. So the kid is underneath that. Of course, it's not on, but that's where he sits, and he's doing his homework over there. And even that attitude, it's where do you see American kids? They were like, I'm bored. I don't want to be here. And I see them. They talk to their parents in a very decent manner, all of that stuff. But that kid also knows, because sometimes, the kid is going to maybe complain about this or that. And then what you see when you hear when the mom is explaining, eventually the kid is getting to understand that him or her being willing to come and be based out of there until mom can go home, he's actually helping his mom be able to do a job that eventually will keep the family in business. And so you see, even there, it's linked. And you see, immigrants, the children of immigrants still have that. But then it gets lost once they have their own children. But I do think as a society, we really need to rethink all of that. It would be very important that whether, it doesn't matter if you're a billionaire or if you are, a person of modest means, to really, really understand that kids need to feel responsible. And I think, again, there too, that was one of the great insights of someone like Maria Montessori. Kids want and need to feel that their work matters. Anyway, so I just wanted to add that because I'm appalled at the amount of toys, and for someone like me, I never really had to rely on toys. The only thing I played with was chess and checkerboards. That's it. And I argue that that's not play. That's not a toy. It's something else. But I never needed anything, and I felt like I was one of the most entertained person, growing up. So
I find all of that really interesting. And I think, to your point about Maria Montessori, I could agree completely that that's one of the things that she did very well, is she bridged the gap between the childhood instinct to play and the childhood instinct to mimic the real world, and also the reality that kids actually are very capable of doing a lot of things functionally that we think of as being things that older kids and adults it's exclusively their responsibility. Younger kids crave the responsibility. They want to be actors in the world. They want to watch mom cook us, like put together a snack in the kitchen, and they want to know what it feels like to do that.
Yes.
And so they, as America and many households, will go to their play kitchen and they'll act it out. And that's, an interface for them that's child size that they can play with. But in Montessori schools, everything is sized for the child, but they're given the responsibility. You're hungry. Why don't you go make a snack? And they're able to. And they're able to actually, cut up the food and set the table and maybe offer a snack to their friend who's also hungry. And they're given this bridge between, the childhood limitations, like the reality of being a child, and this much larger scale adult world that they so long to be experimenting with because they're hardwired to try it in preparation of actually having to do the thing when they're adults, which is, watching that function of play at the kid, in the play kitchen, or like making the snack, is a grand metaphor for so much of what's happening in childhood all the way through to adulthood, where you're testing your capacity to do the things that one day when you become an adult, either all of a sudden it's like, okay, you're 18, you graduated from high school, you're an adult now, or if it's, more gradual, at 16, 15, you get a job, 16, you get a car, but as they gain these responsibilities, they've already tried their hand at all of it. So they're prepared to do it. But one of the other things, and I know we don't have a lot of time left, but I'd like to touch on this very briefly, because you mentioned this earlier, and I think that this is a really important part of the story of what you're building. You talked about teaching kids about entrepreneurship a couple of times, but you also talked about entrepreneurship being the road out of poverty for people in Africa. And you talk about that being more important than the very top-down education that one might think. And I know that you get into this extensively in your book. You've done lots of talks about this already. So I know that, we could talk about this for 5 hours and not cover everything. But I want to talk about this specifically in the context of education. But I think this also, this gap in maybe some people's understanding also needs to be bridged, that you're not going after building a better credentialing school. You're not trying to build something that's going to help kids get the piece of paper that says they're qualified to be an accountant, but they actually, they actually learn the French. So it's like they're going to school and they, as it stands now, they can go all the way through a school in Senegal, graduate, and their French is still very broken and they have trouble, articulating their thoughts in the bureaucratic language of their country. And so you're not just going and saying, well, let's fix that problem. Let's make sure all the kids going through a school actually speak French, but they're still going through the system. You're doing a fundamental shift in paradigm where you're saying, the colonial schools are teaching kids to be bureaucrats, but that's not going to help their communities prosper. They need to learn how to think entrepreneurially so that they can go and start building the things that they want to see in their communities and in their country and in their personal lives. Like they need to start thinking like builders so that they can, from the ground up instead of from the top down, start building the things that they want to see in their world and benefit from in their individual and communal lives. And I think that that's so important, that entrepreneurship is this entirely different paradigm, even for people who, because I think entrepreneurship is also a very big, like when we talk about it as a paradigm, it's much more than a vocation. So when someone's an entrepreneur, it means they started a business usually, but
it's a whole mindset.
Entrepreneurial thinking, like they could be working for you inside of your company and they're not starting anything of their own, but they're thinking entrepreneurially, which are the types of people that you want to hire. So I just want to, before we wrap up this conversation, I'd love to hear you just like emphasize a little bit more, like why this is so important, not, in Senegal specifically, but also in Africa more broadly, and also like scaling it out even further, like, clicking the plus button on the map one more time, like on a, not even just, on one continent, but on all of the continents, this shift is so important. And I think you do such a great job explaining why. And I think it's something that's not always intuitive, but is really important to understand.
No, it is. Well, thank you. Yeah, so basically, I explained earlier that my goal in this life is for Africans to become co-creators in prosperity and entrepreneurship. And, we need to have 2.5 billion Africans being prosperous by 2050. Something that's very simple is the solution to poverty, which is what Africa is mostly plagued with. The solution to poverty is prosperity. Prosperity is built by entrepreneurs, period. They just make the whole machine run, okay? Period. But for entrepreneurship to thrive, you need a good business environment for it. So you have to have a world-class business environment for the best, most optimized outcome. So that's for the externalities. But from the person standpoint, you also need to have somebody who is really prepared to take the best advantage of such a business class environment. Meaning, if you provide with a great business environment, you have a free markets all around you, you're really free to enterprise and everything, but you don't know what it is to be free. And that's the other thing. For me, entrepreneurship is the practice of freedom. It really is. That's how I put them together. It's a practice of freedom, and freedom is and it's also the other way I describe entrepreneurship is entrepreneurs are those who criticize by creating, right? So in this situation, so you all of a sudden, when you understand why entrepreneurship is so important to not only Africa, but to anyone and anywhere in the world where people want to build prosperity and keep it as well and keep going. Because it's very easy to scale back, to slide back. If you start having a society of bureaucrats, people are no longer being as entrepreneurial as they should be, you're going to start to slide back. So this is something that has to be maintained, and it's something that has to not only be maintained, but it has to be nourished. Era after era after era. So if poverty is my biggest problem, because poverty is my problem, and if the way we're going to become global co-creators of prosperity and innovation is through entrepreneurship, then you understand why I'm working on those two. I'm working on the business environment. So that's the whole other aspect of my life. That's what this book talks about a lot of. How do we get there? And another thing that I'm working on is on the people themselves. Because in order for you to have an amazing tomato plant, or to have, you have to have the seed itself has to have some of the best qualities. So here we're talking about all of this concept of virtues that the person has to have. So the seed has to be of the best quality or optimized the most, as well as the soil and the environment in which you're going to plant that seed. Those two need to happen together for you to have the most beautiful tomato plant at the end of the day, producing the juiciest, most healthy tomatoes that you can hope for. Us humans are no different. We're part of nature after all, right? But that's really pretty much what it is. For me, the recipe is just that. And then you keep on watering it. But that to me is part of also the environment. So I'm doing a lot of work on the environment part with especially the startup cities and all of that good stuff, where we're trying to really provide people in Africa with world-class business environments that they detrimentally lack right now. But at the same time, we also need to make sure that the seeds, aka the people, also are optimized for great success in an entrepreneurial world so that they become entrepreneurs themselves or they become intrapreneurs. So people who maybe they work for other people, but they work for entrepreneurs, but within that, they are people who really bring an entrepreneurial mindset. Because whenever you have an entrepreneurial mindset, everything just goes better and goes faster because basically these are solutions. They're solutions provided. Like I said, criticize by creating. These are solutioners. So the more solutions we can find, the more problems we can solve, the better we do and the faster we go. And the more innovations get to pop up. So that's why for me, this school, it was very important. You see, so many people got all excited. Oh, we're supporting a school in Africa. Don't take me wrong. I'm not going to do what people do to Mr. Beast and be like, oh my God, butt out, we don't want your help or whatever. That's not that. But just like, can we redirect your thinking? Can we shift your thinking about education? Should we still in the 21st century be simply happy because we helped kids in Africa become literate, meaning knowing their ABCs and knowing how to count? Don't take me wrong. It is a good first step. But let's be honest, is that really what's going to get this kid to survive and thrive? Because I'm not just happy with surviving. We need to thrive. We need to flourish. Is that what's going to get this kid to really thrive and flourish, especially in the 21st century? Kids who maybe by the time they're done, they have never yet touched a computer, and they're going to they're going to touch their first computer in their life when they're going to be maybe 21 or 22, if they're lucky to even have a job or an internship or something that actually gets them in a position where they use that. And then guess what? They're going to be behind everybody. They don't know how to build spreadsheets or anything like that. So you see the work we have to do. And so for us, the catching up is simply no longer an option. We have to leapfrog. We completely have to leapfrog. So for me, it's not just like even changing the paradigm. It's like you're changing the paradigm, you're also leapfrogging, you're doing so many things at the same time. But kids can handle it. They can handle it. That's what I love about kids. They can handle it. They don't know what came before. They don't need to know what came before. You put it in front of them, they're going to go for it. So that's why the school we're doing here, it's really about giving them the tools to be lifelong learners. I give you an example. At the school, every child has to sign an agreement. Literally, there is a children's agreement, and we kept it very simple. But they have to read it, talk about it with their guide, and most importantly, there's a signing ceremony, because your word is your bond. You see, all of these when I talked about virtues, they need, and everything we ask of them, like they're signing this agreement saying that they're going to be on time. They're going to go for punctuality. They're going to go for being civil towards each other, all of these things. And for each one of them, we explain to them why this virtue is critical for them to thrive in the world of adults later on. Because in the world of, so we explain all of these things. So they see that it's not just like something that adults are asking of them and it just sounds nice. But like even there, they see the relationship between that and where they're trying to go, and where they are and where we're trying to go. So for everything like that, so read it, discuss it, and then there is a signing ceremony. And then they sign the document and then they go on. But every time there's a problem, or if they're going to be doing something that went against what they signed, then of course you bring them together and you start talking and comparing what is it that they signed compared to what just happened. And where do we go from there? So all of this stuff is very important. But for me, for us, most importantly, also with the school, what we're doing, the curriculum is done in such a way that we expose them to so much. We expose them to the world. These are kids who, for some of them, have never gone to the capital city of their country, for the most part. And all they see of it is maybe on TV or whatever. And let alone, before we started, they had no relationship between where their country is and maybe where the US is. Although they hear about the US, they hear about France, they hear about all of these other places. So we're using, for example, the computer, using Google Earth, and then just kind of flying above the Earth. We stop wherever they want to stop. And maybe we're, somewhere along the way, they decide to stop in Turkey. Why do you want to stop on Turkey? Oh, because, my friend's mom, I heard, has moved to Turkey. And I'm curious. So Google Earth, you get to see, we zoom in, maybe sometimes they know the address of where the mom lives or of this friend. And then they kind of look, they get to see the city, what it looks like. And then if there's more interest, then you pop up a video that we kind of all watch together. And there also, you're using this alt, by the way, to promote, to kind of help them learn a specific language as well. So there's just like a lot of things that's kind of built in. And again, even here, we just follow the interests of a child in order to help them acquire some very important skill sets. Right now, one of the kids, for example, at our factory, when the ladies produce the lip balms, the body balms, all of that stuff, each one of them, there is a production sheet with who made who was in charge that day, who weighted all the ingredients, what time did they start melting everything, what time did they start pouring, all of that good stuff. And for each ingredient that went in, the lot number, all of that stuff, and just all of this information that has to be there. What temperature was it when they were pouring? What temperature was it when they were unmolding? All of that stuff, because we need to keep track of everything. So then it comes into a sheet, right? And then that is kind of filed away. And normally that type of that information, eventually one of the ladies should actually go and put it into the computer so that it's all saved in the cloud and everything. But instead of doing that, I'm asking one of our young people to actually do that. Because when they're doing this, now you can sit there and do YouTube tutorials or whatever as to how to create a spreadsheet or how to fill it up, how to, learn how to fill out all of that stuff. Or you can have a real life experience where for something that matters, because your mom is working over there and this is all real. This is not a play. This is not a play anymore. And of course, we have systems to make sure that the stuff is accurate. And even there's a system for him to be accurate. And guess what? Soon I'm probably going to be paying this child, some money that maybe he or she puts into a little account, right? Or we put it in a little box like a piggy bank, and then that's some money that the kid is going to be able to have. But what we're trying to do is by the time they're 17 or 18 or 16, that some of these kids maybe are already doing some type of digital work that actually pays them quite well. You know what I mean? So this idea that you have to wait till you're 25, go through all of these, it's like being able to bring value, right? And so these are some of the things that's the goal for later. But everything that they're doing is literally experiential learning. There's nothing that just, play for the sake of playing or simulating stuff. We try to find in our natural environment, we try to find in our daily, task, we try to find, like how can we just get them to acquire some of these skills. Also, we have the Socratic discussion that they have on a regular basis. So if we're going to try to instill some values in people, like you would see, I will never forget, we had these classes where when the kids were younger, when they were maybe 8 or 7, when we first got the first cohort, and they were reading these counts. Counts are like almost like your fake stories or fairy tales or whatever. And then reading about a king who would imprison the people he would imprison into the walls and all of that. And then having to talk about the morals of that. Is it right? Not right? Why not? When would it be? When would it not be? How does it work? So we use the Socratic discussions, and we choose, to this day, we choose our texts very carefully in order to kind of bring out some values and have the kids discuss them. We don't tell them what's right. We don't tell them what's wrong necessarily, but we have these conversations where eventually it all pops up. And you start to see people thinking, for themselves. Michael does it very well with his school, his Socratic experience. Like if your best friend stole something and they stole, would you go tell on them or not? Or why yes? Why no? I don't know. Why do you don't know? What other considerations? So you're really getting these young people to think about the type of society that they want to live in, and to think about what's right, what's wrong, and to think about how to think about it, right? And so we do a lot of that as well. And it's very interesting because when you're surrounded by a culture where there is such discrepancy between what the people are on their own and where poverty maybe has taken them, or what you're trying to teach them in these public schools or whatever, things can be very disjointed. So this is our attempt right there to build a subculture where even if kids are surrounded by adults who somehow have learned to not tell the truth because they think that's the only way to make it, or when you're in a top down environment, when people make mistakes, they don't even own up to their mistakes, because making a mistake means, and especially owning it means, you're probably going to be fired. So people always do this. But these kids, we're trying to give them, a chance to really get started on the right foot. And so those are all the things that are basically everything we're trying to equip these kids with is embedded in everyday real life experiences. And nothing feels fake. Nothing feels like, oh, we come to school, we're going to read this text, we're going to talk about the offer and all of that stuff. Well, we talk about the offer, but it comes into the normal conversation. Not you're not preparing for a test. It's not about you preparing for a test. Like, how many daughters did they have? And it's so funny because at first, when we started doing this with the kids, you ask them, we read something, and then you ask them, so tell me more about what we just read. And literally, you would see them almost repeating word for word what they just read. And I'm like, that's not what we're going after. But that's what for them doing school is. That's what the habit is. And eventually we had to go from there to even bringing up the concept of the character. How many characters are in the story? And then them being like, huh, what's a character? Okay, well, then you go through those things. And then why do you think the character is feeling this way or doing this or whatever? So all of a sudden now they have a different relationship to the story. And then there also we use it to do a little bit of math. Oh, your book yesterday, how many pages have you read? And then you see the person be like, like, okay, what page did you leave it at? Yeah, when you first started your book, what page were you at? And then they were like, oh, 45. And then by the time you close it, what page were you at? And then they go back to the book and they look where they moved. Oh, 84. And then boom, right? Like, all of a sudden you see them doing the little math on their little, thing. And all of a sudden they give you that. So we're going from back and forth, different things, and it's all varied. But it all feels natural. And you remember when we talked earlier about Jomo Kenyatta saying it was conversational and it was all natural. Nothing felt out of place. Nothing felt like we're just trying to unnaturally, okay, now math, now this. Even when we're in math, when we're doing math, we use a lot of Khan Academy and other things. But even when we're doing math, all of a sudden now we started with math, but all of a sudden we're into a little bit of biology. Because, oh, what's the difference between a rabbit and a hare? Okay, that's interesting. Because because they're speaking in a certain language, then you have to also translate it. And in that translation, you're going to have a little bit of a mistake, of course. But instead of looking at it as a mistake, we look at it as an opportunity to actually even make, by the way, what's the distinction between a hare and like I said, and a rabbit, right? Because they're not the same. They look the same, but they're not the same. And anyway, so you see every opportunity. So our staff were basically trained for every opportunity to be a moment of learning, especially the what somebody else might call a mistake. For us, we love those because those are where growth opportunity is. Because then we stop, we're like, huh, what's weird? What made you want to say that? Or why? Oh, I see why you would think it's a rabbit. But anyway, so I won't want to bore you with that. But you see how this it's a very radical way of looking at things. And I know that there are so many people. The kids totally get it. They get what's going on for them. All of a sudden, now it's making sense, and they love being at the school. They love it, love it, love it, love it, love it. But the adults, some of them, you can tell, like even the people we hire, I have to be super careful because so many of them are so trained. Because normally when you have a school, you're forced to hire so-called people who come from an education background. But all of them come with a certain mold in mind. And that's why right now, we have to be super careful how we operate because not everybody's trained for this. And people still think it's okay to hit a child. And we're like, absolutely not. Scream at them. We're like, absolutely not. Yell, whatever. No, 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 no. And most importantly, we never make a child feel unsafe. And unsafe not just physically, but like maybe you're, like how you ask a question can be, you have to be very careful. So even I sometimes, I know that if I had a rough day or whatever, because I'm giving a class myself every week, and I know that if I didn't have a good, if something is off with me, I prefer not to be exposed to the kids, because kids feel everything. They feel everything, literally. So I think we also even ourselves check ourselves a lot from that standpoint. So me now, I'm very good at being like, I'm not going to be able to do it because I just had this very rough whatever meeting or whatever it is. It's better for the kids to be told that I'm traveling or whatever. Then you could argue that, of course, Magatte, you should be changing your mindset. Go to this classroom, put it aside, and I would do that when I can. But when I know I can't, when I know if something just happened, it's still too raw, I am definitely not taking that energy to the kids. And so I think, and as long as you do that, kids then learn to just be comfortable. And if they're comfortable, then we also believe that values are better created that way, because they learn they don't have to lie, they don't have to be worried about it. They just can tell you the truth, and we can take it from there. And that's what I tell them all the time. I tell them, kids, guys, no matter what happens, there's nothing in this world that cannot be solved, except for, if somebody dies, that there's nothing that we, I don't even bring that up. But I'm like, nothing in this world but we cannot solve, right? I'm sure someday we're going to tell me you lied because maybe, I don't know, somebody's sick or whatever. I don't know. But it is true, though. There is always a solution. Always. There's always a solution, even if we don't know what it is or we don't end up finding it. But there's always one. And we have to start with step one, which is try to find it. So anyway, so that's pretty much what we're doing over there. It's radically different from what people are used to. But we think we have something really good going. And now we're at the stage where we're going to scale this project. Right now, my home literally is the school. I ran out of space. We only my bed is what I own in this house. Everything else has been taken over by, and now we actually have now a little nursery. Like the first baby is there. So yeah, but we think we've got something really great. I'm very happy with the people that we have working with us, and so now the time is going to be ready to scale this thing up. And once we can get it to a good place in Senegal, we actually have another country in Africa that's ready. Those guys want to do it maybe at the national level. So I think there is a really, when I say that I'm bullish on Africa, I am bullish on Africa. There's a bright future waiting for us. And it's a lot of it is going to have to do with these kids that we train, one by one. We see this type of stuff coming up more and more across the continent, and so for me, that's a promise of it. And what I love about it is you have all of these kids who technically would have had known nothing else but what we're going to put them through, in a good way. And that to me, it's such a great promise. These kids that are 3 years old, if we do our jobs right, and if we don't somehow fall off a bandwagon or disappear or no longer can take care of them, if we do our job right, you're going to have kids who have always had it right who always had the best opportunity from the beginning. And for me, that's what I'm so excited about. To the point that we have a nursery with one baby in it right now. That one is even better, because that one, I mean, he gets to be, because he's a little boy, he gets to be fed. I mean, his mom. So another thing I'm doing is the way I organize the work structure is that I really wanted to design it for also women as they become also moms. And so that's why so this woman, for example, she's the one who decided when she would be willing to come back to work. And it's funny because she could have left the workplace earlier, but then she would have had to come at a certain time. And she said, "Magatte, I don't want to stay at home. I have a health pregnancy. I'm fine. I don't want to stay at home. Actually, it's just not going to be good if I stay home because I'm going to be sleeping. It's not good. It's not going to be good for me, my health of a baby." And I say, "Fine, keep coming, but you have to promise me something, anything you feel, whatever, we stop and you take care of yourself." She's like, "Yeah, fine, fine." The good news is we don't do it. We don't touch anything, bad for anybody. Anyway, so after that, though, she said, but after the baby was born, she had to come back, I think, after 2 months by law. And she said, "But could I come only at month 4? Because I really don't feel like leaving my child behind at so little." And I'm like, and then she's like, "You don't have to pay me those 2 months, but can I please take that time off?" And I'm like, "Not only are you going to take it, but on top of it, I'm going to pay you." And when you're ready, you come back there. And that's what we did. And before she was ready to come back, we had created a little nursery with a crib, bought all the supplies and everything. And I give her permission to leave as often as she needs to go nurse her child, go rocket, hang out, do what she needs to do, and come back to work. We're like 5 minutes away from the school to the workplace,
Mhm.
and of course, she's not abusing any of it. It's all working out, and that's what I'm saying. So you see, us in Africa, we have a chance to leapfrog all of this. And
Yeah.
later, my goal is by the time the kids are small, my goal is soon, we want to retrofit everything at the workplace so that if the moms decide to, they can bring the child with them to work. And the child, maybe they have little desks and we can decide where
Mhm.
the desks are. Maybe the desk is like by mom's area or whatever, but the kids are also going to be busy doing their own thing. So for me, there's an opportunity for a completely new play here. And we're just, we're creating something where there was nothing before.
Right.
Why not start with the best, leapfrog completely and start from there?
Absolutely. So before we wrap up, I would love to have you, for people who've enjoyed this interview, I'd love to have you share where else people can find your work. You've mentioned the book a couple times. I know that you're doing some things with a school as well that people can connect with if they feel so inclined. Where would you send people next, or what are you working on that you'd like to share?
Yeah, no, definitely the book for anybody who can, want to have it. It's called The Heart of a Cheetah. It's available on Amazon and everywhere you can buy books online. Um, Also, you can go on tiossanacademy.org. I'm sure, Hannah, you'll share that. Tiossan,
Yes.
Tiossan academy.org. So you get to have a little bit more information there. And there also you can donate to the school. And the other thing is on social media, you can follow me at Magatte W, Magatte, and also my website, magattewade.com. And anyone who has some ideas or is interested in any aspect of this, also please reach out. We definitely love the concept of the 101 language acquisition skills. So some of the older kids, we like to be able to pair them with obviously people we have vetted who can spend, a few hours or 1 hour a week or a couple hours a week, whichever time you have, 101 with the kids, to kind of do that English immersion skill set. Also, if people are French speakers as well, that's very helpful. But other than that, soon, I think sometimes next in January, we're going to start having a specific newsletter about our efforts, specifically education related in Senegal. So if you want to have access to that as well, go ahead and make sure that you send an email, or when you go to my website, there is a way for you to sign up, and just somewhere where you can put the comment, just say all you can say, especially school or something like that, telling us that basically that's what you want us to earmark you so that we can send you those communications. But I think there's a lot of interesting stuff there. And Hannah, my dream is someday, right now we think of Africa and helping with education in Africa. The way we've been thinking about it, we're happy because we built these mud schools. And like I said, the kids are repeating mindlessly after a teacher. When we done that, we're like, oh, we've all done a great job. And it's good work. It's good work in place of nothing, right? But my goal here is to inspire everybody to think beyond that, because if we truly want to support these kids in terms of them becoming really operational and able to face off with the 21st century, we're going to have to do way more than that. And it doesn't take that much. It really doesn't take that much, because when you're working with what you have, that's actually where the best education lies in, right? And so I really would like to inspire people to kind of reconsider what is it that they're thinking about when they think about supporting education in Africa, right? And it's not just about this ed tech, like putting more kids in front of a tablet, or
Right.
because people think it's the solution. Even here in the US, they think, but education done right is it's high touch. Of course, there's something that the software can do, but there's also something absolutely that the human has to do, human to human. And so I really would love for people to think about it that way. And when they do, we're right there, to be the people to do it with. And the last thing I wanted to share also with people is, um, one day, that's the goal. one day. Maybe not for your little guys, because I understand no mom is going to be like, oh, I'm sending my 6-year-old or 7-year-old, but as we build the high schools, as we build the middle school, maybe even, who knows, it's my dream to see American kids, Westerners, actually send their kids abroad to Africa. Not to come as helpers or anything like that. We're going to go save Africa. You're coming because we have things that really will help your children thrive, especially at their age in life, where, middle school, teenage years, it's a mess. We, in our traditional societies, those of us who would have stayed in touch with it, and that's exactly what we're doing with our school, then this will be a haven for your child to come and be reconnected with what matters when it's all said and done, what truly matters, and develop some of these, and also get some of these values that you have been trying to teach them, get to put them into practice, and for these kids to be in an environment where the culture really supports that, where they're not going to be a discrepancy between what it is that you're trying to instill in them in terms of good things and what the society at large is putting in front of them. You know what I mean? So I think that type of exchange needs to happen. It needs to happen. I am a firm believer that everybody has something to contribute, and definitely our children, our cultures have a lot to contribute to your children and to your cultures. Cultures do best when they mix, because when they mix, naturally, oftentimes the best comes out as well. So that's really the goal also, eventually, as we scale this up. I really believe that there's something there. There's a reason why the parents of immigrant children here, once their kids are usually around middle school, teenage years for sure, they send them back home. They send them back home to continue their education, because they say, if they stay in America, my child is going to become a person that I do not want them to become. But I know also other American parents do not want them to become, but they just don't have a choice. So that very thing that these immigrant parents are doing, the fact that they know when the kids are little, America might be a good place for them. But once they get to teenage years, the society here, there are some things that it doesn't support, even if you know it's good and you want it, then they send their kids over there. So it's like getting the best of both places at different ages, right? So at some point, it would be good that American parents also get to learn from all of that, and be able to send your kids in places where there's initiation rituals. Because when you turn 13, then, this idea that now, oh, I'm going to be a teenager and do all of these crazy things. No. There are societies where actually when you turn 13, you're starting to be an adult. This is now, the things are going to become serious. And the initiation is just a way to mark that moment. Boys, boys, girls, whatever they're doing, and then just go do stuff. There's so much richness. There's so much, and it's healthy and it's good. So at one point, that's what I would like to see happen: that we send our children to each other, depending on what it is that they need, because it takes a village to raise a child, and that village should be global, because it's all one species at the end of the day. And sometimes there's something you can't do, but we can do that for your children. And sometimes there are things we can't do, but maybe you can do that for our children. And that's just so it makes the world go round. So let us work towards that. So that's really what I wanted to share with people.
I love that. That's beautiful. Magatte, thank you so much for taking the time to do this. It's always such a pleasure to talk to you. And this was such a fun conversation to have. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you for having me.
Have a lovely rest of your day.
Thank you. You too, Hannah.
All right, that's a wrap for this week. Thank you so much for being here. If you're listening on Spotify or Apple, please leave a 5-star rating. Ratings are how this show gets discovered by other people, and it helps me bring in better guests. And no matter where you're listening, please like and subscribe to the show to make sure you don't miss a future episode. That's all for this week. Thank you so much for being here. I'll see you next week.